Animal House. What do you get when you cross a lion with a tiger? This 900-pound flesh-eating beast. Hybrid animals have long existed in the imagination, from the beast of Greek mythology to the creations of modern-day science fiction. But they also exist in real life, in some rather unusual combinations, and in some rather intimidating ones as well, as Vicky Mabry now reports.
This big guy is a liger. Yes, a liger. And trainer Doc Antle and his partner Rajani have the biggest one in the world.
This is Hercules, who is our liger boy, 900 pounds and 12 feet tall. He's a gigantic kid because he's a liger. Father lion, mother tiger makes him...
Father is a lion, mother is a tiger.
Makes him the liger.
That's a good boy.
Hercules is skilled at, well, eating about 100 pounds of meat a day.
He's got these stripes and spots that are all over him that some young lions have, but they fade away. In him, he has more of a tiger pattern to his head of stripes that's got some spotting in the middle of it.
He doesn't have a mane.
He doesn't have a mane. It's more like a tiger. But in many ways, he is just kind of 50-50, and it's a blend. It's not one trait and another added together. Everything about him seems exaggerated. They seem to live longer. They eat more. We've never seen anything happen in the ligers except bigger, stronger, faster.
But why create these exotic species? Antle views them as wildlife ambassadors.
Hybrids have a place. In present day, their real place is awe and wonder, which I hope leads to an interest in the natural world. Samson, hup, hup, down, down. It's theorized that ligers are this enormous size because the inhibitor growth gene exists in the female lion and in the male tiger. So when you switch around and you get a male lion breeding with a female tiger, creating the liger, you get this gigantic size. Nothing tells it when to stop. In the wild, this enormous size wouldn't necessarily be of any advantage because it would require so much more food. Samson here can readily eat 25 pounds of food in a sitting, where an adult lion can subside on 7 to 10 pounds of food.
Cedar trees, right? And same thing in Numbers 13:33, they describe that we look like grasshoppers by comparison. So I've got some scale giants here for you. Average 6-foot man there in the lower left. Og of Bashan, Goliath scale. Goliath is 9 to 12 feet, depending on who you read. Og of Bashan, 15 to 18 feet, depending on who you read. Then you got the early Canaanite giants in the smaller end of the scale of a cedar tree, between 24 and 36 feet tall. Buddy for help carrying the thing. So I found that the cluster of grapes actually helps you understand the scale of the giants, interestingly enough. Conservative weight, he's talking about Og of Bashan. He's analyzing Og of Bashan. Again, Og of Bashan is between 15 to 18 feet tall, depending on who you read. If we use the more conservative weight calculation, then he, Og, would have needed to consume at least 22,657 calories per day just to stay alive, as per the basal metabolic rate, which calculates based on a person's height and weight how many calories they need to live if they are not doing any significant work per day. In other words, that's how much that dude has to eat just to keep his heart beating, just to stay alive. But we learned from Scripture that Og of Bashan was a warrior. This guy was a fighting man. So he obviously had to eat quite a bit more. In modern terms, we might think that Og would have had to eat more than 30 pizzas or about 150 cheeseburgers per day in order to get the needed calories to maintain the lifestyle of a warrior. We're talking about Og, this little guy down here in the lower left. Just imagine how many calories per day that guy needs to eat. It helps you understand why the Hebrew spy says the land devours itself. Man, giants need a lot to eat. 4 and 5 is talking about the second commandment there, and then it talks about, I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the 3rd and 4th generation of them that hate me. And then it talks about it again, same terminology in Numbers 14:18, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the 3rd and 4th generation. I'm thinking, is God just applying the sins that we commit to our offspring just to be vindictive? Or is there a genetic reason for this? Is there something going on in our genetics that when we commit sin, it actually passes on to our offspring as far as the third and fourth generation? Started to think about that. We've got two confirmations here that this is an issue. God visits the sins, third and fourth generation. Came across an interesting documentary dealing with epigenetics. That was something I never really heard of before doing this research, but I'm going to play a few minutes of a clip from TED. I forget what TED stands for, but there's like these conferences that happen all the time. You can watch TED conferences on YouTube.
What is it that makes our cells different from one another? What makes them look and behave differently? What is it that makes a muscle cell, for instance, look different from a neuron? After all, these cells contain exactly the same DNA, but it's their epigenetic instructions that help tell them which genes to turn on and which ones to turn off. And with those different genes at play, these can become very different cells. So you might be wondering, when does all this epigenetic information get laid down on our chromatin? And the answer is that much of it happens during our embryonic development. So interestingly, when you were first conceived and you were just comprised of a few undifferentiated embryonic stem cells, which had the potential to become any cell in your body, your chromatin didn't have many epigenetic marks on it. It was only as your cells began to divide and receive signals and information from surrounding cells that the epigenetic marks began to accumulate, and then the genes began to get turned off and turned on, and the muscle cell became very different from the neuron. This brings me to a really important point about epigenetics, and that is that epigenetic marks can be influenced by the environment. And when I say environment, I don't just mean those surrounding cells that tell a neuron to become a neuron. I also mean the environment outside of the developing embryo. So the food that mom eats, or the prenatal vitamins that she takes, or the cigarettes that she smokes, or the stresses that she encounters at home or at work, can all be transmitted as chemical signals through her bloodstream to her developing fetus, where they can get laid down as epigenetic marks that affect the fetus's own genes and long-term health. Now, this has been shown experimentally in mice. Mice contain a gene called agouti, which makes them obese and yellow and susceptible to diseases like cancer and diabetes. This gene and these traits can be passed down from generation to generation through DNA, so that an agouti mother will give rise to a fat, yellow, disease-susceptible offspring if that offspring contains the agouti gene. Now, here's something interesting about the agouti gene. It can be turned off if silencing epigenetic marks accumulate around it. So, if a pregnant agouti mother is fed a diet which is supplemented with these silencing epigenetic marks, those marks will be chemically transmitted to the DNA of her embryo, where they'll accumulate around that agouti gene and effectively turn it off. Her embryo will maintain those marks, and so it will be born and grow up to be an adult mouse that's thin and brown and healthy. Even though this mother is genetically identical at the DNA level to both sets of these offspring, you can see that the diet that she consumed during her pregnancy can affect the health and appearance of her offspring. These correlations between maternal behavior during and the long-term health consequences for their offspring are thought to be linked by epigenetics, much as you've seen here in the case of mice. Now, another important point to make about epigenetics is that these types of marks can be transmitted not only from a pregnant female to her fetus, but also from generation to generation, if the marks are put down on our sperm or eggs. So if you're in the audience and you're not pregnant, and you're not even thinking about conceiving, think about this, because the lifestyle decisions that you make today can still affect future generations. Now, this idea of transgenerational inheritance of epigenetic marks is still being debated and studied in terms of humans, but I should add that non-human organisms, mice, flies, worms, there's mounting evidence that this theory holds true. In fact, it's being shown in the lab that over tens of generations, epigenetic marks can be passed down. This actually brings up a really encouraging point about epigenetics, in that epigenetic marks are reversible. I think this concept that we can positively impact our genes is really profound and empowering, because we'd always worked under the assumption that our genes are set in stone, that they're beyond our influence. I want to end today by challenging you and myself to take the opportunity that we have before us to positively impact our long-term health by treating our epigenome kindly through healthy lifestyle decisions. Thank you.
I don't know. But we see in the scriptures that the Israelites and the people of God had a lot of trouble dealing with the Canaanites. So they clearly were not walking in the ways of God, and maybe they just continued to perpetuate bad epigenetic marks. So there's plenty of children in Ham's lineage that I believe they're just fine. There's no indication there's anything wrong with it. There are a few suspects. Obviously, I think all of Canaan's children are definitely suspect. At least one in Mitzrayim's lineage and one, possibly two, in Cush's lineage. Clearly, Ham had plenty of other children who did not have bad genetics. Okay, so please hear me on this. I am not advocating or in any way suggesting that Ham's line is cursed. I do not believe this is a race issue. I believe that this is an obedience issue. Obedience both before and after the flood. Some were obedient and followed the ways of God, some were not. Let's look at what happens to people who are obedient. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 9 says, Know therefore that the Lord thy God, he is God, the faithful God, which keepeth covenant and mercy with them that love him and keep his commandments to what? 1,000 generations. Now we look at disobedience, so we'll go back to one of the verses I showed you earlier, Numbers 14:18. The Lord is long-suffering and of great mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression, and by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation. When it came to mixing species and creating Nephilim, well, that was certainly an act of disobedience, which came with the consequences that, of course, I've been talking about in this presentation. And that's what I suggest may be going on right here in Genesis 15, where it says in the fourth generation, there's that same thing, fourth generation. Now, this part right here is written before what we see in Exodus, where God says right there that this is the first occurrence that I'm aware of, and I could be wrong, but I think the first occurrence is Exodus 20, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation. This is written before that, Genesis, talking about the fourth generation, the iniquity of the Amorites. Just putting it out there. I don't know, something interesting to look at. Post-flood giants, they go by many names. Here are a few of them. Nephilim, of course. Raphaim, the name Raphaim means the dead ones. So these are walking dead ones. Zuzim, also known as Zamzumim. Their name means roving creatures, contrivers of evil, achievers. These guys were builders. They definitely were achievers. They built huge megalithic structures out there, but they were roving contrivers of evil. The Imims, their name means troglodyte or cave dweller. Amorites means the sayers. I'm not quite sure what to make of that. But some would say that they actually, the giant, Josephus writes of the giants as having terrible sounds, that they could make terrible sounds that were horrific to the hearing and terrible to the sight as well, some of these creatures. Amalekites, people of lapping or licking up. Not sure what to make of that. Maybe they're a bunch of slobberers. I don't know. The Anakim, their name means long-necked ones. So, and in Deuteronomy, chapter 7, verses 1 and 2, we see it says, When the Lord your God brings you into the land where you are entering to possess it, and clears away many nations before you, the Hittites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Canaanites and the Perizzites and the Hivites and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater and stronger. Yeah, greater and stronger. These are the same guys, some of these guys here listed, the ites that you find in the lineage of Canaan in Genesis chapter 10. He's naming them here again. Nations greater and stronger than you. And when the Lord your God delivers them before you and you defeat them, then you shall utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them and show no favor to them. God's pretty hardcore here. So we have a choice. Either God's into genocide or there's a reason why he's doing this. And I submit there's a reason why he's doing it. They're wiping out Nephilim territory. They're cleaning the land of bad genetics. In order to possess the land God had promised their ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the Israelites had to completely cleanse the land of Nephilim's seed. And for the most part, they did a pretty good job. However, Joshua and his boys failed to get them all. After a number of victorious battles, we find this report concerning the giant sons of Anak that remained. In Joshua 11:22, it says, "There were none of the Anakim left in the land of the children of Israel, only in Gaza, in Gath, and in Ashdod any remained." Curiously enough, those are still hot spots in the world today, those same regions. And, of course, because they didn't get those giants and Nephilim, for the better part of the next 400 years from that time period or so, these remaining false god-worshipping giants would pose a constant threat and prove to be very problematic for the children of Israel, especially the Philistines, who were descendants of Mizraim's son Caphtor from Crete. These giants and their offspring were mentioned even more times in the Bible than the Amorites. They became one of Israel's primary enemies with about 270 references in the Bible. They were a constant problem for God's chosen people. But then along came a shepherd boy, filled with the Holy Spirit and the fire of God running through his veins. And he had a slingshot, 5 stones, and a whole lot of faith. I don't think he picked up 5 stones because he thought he was going to miss. I believe he picked up 5 stones because Goliath had 4 brothers. May we have the faith of David. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine talking this way about our God? May we have the courage of Joshua and Caleb. You got to imagine Caleb. You know, Joshua didn't really even say much when the spies first came back. It was Caleb going, yeah, we can surely do this. You saw what they were up against, minimum 36-footers. Caleb's like, so what? Let's go. You know, Joshua later piped in agreement, but the other spies said, no way, man. Woo, no, there's not a chance. Well, because of their disobedience and disbelief and lack of faith, they had to wander around in the desert for 40 years until those guys died off. But then, I love Caleb, man. After all of that, he's like 80, 84 years old at this time. He says, give me Hebron. Hebron was formerly known as Kiriath Arba, which means the city of Arba. Arba means 4. It's the biggest of the biggest. And here's Caleb, 80 years old. Give me Arba. Give me Kiriath Arba. I want Hebron. May we have the faith of Joshua, Caleb. Caleb means wholehearted, if I remember right. And Yeshua, Jesus' real name, Joshua, Yah is salvation. And David, a man after God's own heart. Why do I say that? Well, obviously these are great men of faith, but I believe we're going to need to be as well, because they may be coming back, they meaning the Nephilim.